This is Anna Hamilton with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Today is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024 at 11 a.m. and we are in the home of Mr. Alan Lastinger here south of Crescent Beach for the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine Oral History Project. I'm joined by my colleagues Ronan Hart and Deborah Hendricks. And with that, I will ask you just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I guess I'll start at the beginning. I was born in Atmore, Alabama in 1942, disappointingly because I was the first in my family's line to be born outside of Florida since 1821. They came down from Georgia when Florida became a territory and settled in the Monticello area. And my mother and father met in Funiac Springs, and they were both teachers there. And they got married, and Dad went to work in a small school in Escambia County, just south of the Alabama line. And when my mom was pregnant, they thought it was going to be a difficult pregnancy, so they moved into Alabama, to Atmore, Alabama, to be near the hospital there. So I was born just outside of Florida, but outside of our family line. But when we moved to Gainesville when I was 3, and I attended P.K. Young School from kindergarten through the 12th grade. Went to the University of Florida, majored in the business school, marketing. Got a job with Shell Oil Company that lasted about a year before I was drafted into the Navy. Spent 4 years in the Navy, came out as a lieutenant, and then went back to the MBA program at the University of Florida and sent out like 73 letters to various Florida businesses trying to find a job. And I got 2 invitations for interview, one with Tampa Electric Company and one with Barnett Bank. And I accepted the one with Barnett Bank and worked there for 27 years. Started as a financial analyst and ended up as president and chief operating officer. We retired when Bank of America bought us. And we knew that we liked Crescent Beach because we had been coming here since we were in college together. And so we bought some property before we knew we were going to sell the bank. And when we sold, we decided to build this house and move down here in 2001. And that was to celebrate my mom's 90th birthday, which we did here. And we've been here ever since. When we moved in, we had 0 grandchildren. Now we have 3 children and 10 grandchildren. And we built the house so that we could accommodate a crowd. And fortunately, our 3 kids created a crowd for us. And our son Lane is in Asheville, North Carolina. He owns a forest lodging compound up there called Pilot's Cove. Our older daughter Lindsay is in Jacksonville, and she is a stay-at-home mom and a mother of 4. And our younger daughter Amy is a mother of 3, lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, and just bought the house next door. So she'll be a resident of Crescent Beach at some point in time. And that's and we're about to move to Ponte Vedra to a continuous care facility up there. So that's a quick synopsis of where I've been.
That's great. And you say you're referring to your wife Dolores?
Right.
How did you all meet?
That's a funny story. We were at the University of Florida at the same time. I started in '60 and she started in '61. She was a business education major and I was in the business school. And we had an accounting class together. And we were also on the student council together. And I would occasionally be absent to the student council meetings, and she was the secretary, and I would ask her for a hall pass, and she never would give me one. And but the accounting class was at 7:30 in the morning, and unfortunately, I was not an early riser back then, and I missed a lot of the classes. The unfortunate thing about that is that the professor gave pop quizzes. So I missed a number of the pop quizzes to the point where I had to have a 96 on the final to get a D in the course. And I got a D, but it was not a very impressive thing to show my future wife. But anyway, that's where we met.
And you mentioned that you ended up here in Crescent Beach and built this home because you'd summered here often in college.
We came over here occasionally from Gainesville because that was the nearest beach. And then when so we were familiar with Crescent Beach. But then when we went to work, excuse me, with Barnett, we bought a condominium down here at the Coquina. So we've owned a place at Crescent Beach since 1981. So we've kind of created a triangular life between Gainesville, Jacksonville, and Crescent Beach or St. Augustine.
And how have you seen this area, or St. Augustine even more broadly, change since that time?
The change has been incredible, as I'm sure you've observed as well. But when we moved down here, it was a thriving community. I mean, it was an active community, but not nearly as crowded as it is today. I mean, we could go downtown and have dinner at any restaurant without making a reservation. The traffic was just a fraction of what it is right now. The development around, especially in Northern County, has been unbelievable. So it's a different place, and we were fortunate to get on the southern end of the county where the development has not been as significant. And we like it here, but the traffic on A1A is picking up, and it's just a different place. And it's not a bad place, it's just different and not to our liking.
Understandable. Somewhere along the line, you've picked up a love of history. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think it started when I was with Barnett. I would take my lunch hours and go down to the public library there and go through the census data. And I don't know why I did that, but I did it. And I was surprised one day to see David Lastinger in the 1920 some odd census in Monticello, Florida, Jefferson County. And I said, well, that's interesting. I wonder what life was like back in the days when they were fighting Seminoles and that type of thing. So I started collecting books and kind of reading about the history of Florida back in those days. And then a lot of times I read about places I didn't know about, so I started collecting old maps. And so that evolved into a general interest in Florida history. And so I spent probably the last 25 or 30 years collecting books, maps, postcards, paintings about Florida history. And it was a dilemma now that we're planning to sell the house, what to do with all that stuff. And so we decided, at the recommendation of Kathy Deegan, to go to the University of North Florida to their library and see if they would have an interest in our collection, or my collection of books and maps and prints. And they have talked me into establishing a Center for Florida History in the library at University of North Florida, which we have endowed, and we've donated all the maps and books that they wanted. And we've even funded some scholarships and internships for people who can use the collection and use it rather than just put it on display. So I'm very happy that at the end of the day, we're going to have as a result of my collecting activities, a Center for Florida History in Jacksonville at the University of North Florida, which also will include a lot of Barnett history that I've collected over the years.
I hate this question as it's coming out of my mouth, but is there a particular piece that you're especially proud of or that speaks to you in this collection?
It's such a huge collection of maps and books that the map that I really appreciate most, I think, is the seat of war map that was done by Zachary Taylor when they were fighting the Seminoles, and it was kind of the first detailed map of the Florida interior, because the engineers would come down and they would have forts in various places, and they would have topographical information and roads and that type of thing. So it's a pretty good size map, and in addition to the reason of liking the display of the interior, that was the map that Dolores gave me for my 50th birthday. So, so it was that is probably my favorite map. My favorite book is probably the Lemoyne book, where Debris took the Lemoyne prints and duplicated them and put them in a bound book. And I have that book that's also at the University of North Florida now.
And what about you mentioned pictures as well, art. Is there a favorite piece?
There is a favorite piece. There's a artist that lives in Tarpon Springs, a contemporary artist. His name is Christopher Still, and he is in the Florida Artist Hall of Fame. He did the murals in the House of Representatives in Tallahassee. He did the portrait of Lawton Childs. He's just a very, very detailed, focused painter on Florida history. And when we started collecting him back in the 80s, early 80s. And he's done a number of iconic pieces. And so to celebrate Florida's 450th anniversary, we asked him to do a commission of Florida history. And he did a triptych that I have upstairs, and I'll show you later on, that is just a wonderful piece of Florida history. He just takes bits and pieces of things like Marjorie Kennedy Rawlings' book, the Flagler windows that Tiffany did, the punch bowl that was on the battleship Florida. All of this stuff is incorporated in this painting. So that's my favorite painting, yes.
Do you remember when you saw it for the first time?
Oh yeah, I mean it was just beyond our expectation. It was just, and I haven't figured out what to do with that one yet. You know, we're going to take it to Vickers Landing with us and keep it there, but beyond that, I'm not sure what we're going to do with it. Probably put it in the museum. There's a duplicate copy in the governor's mansion in Tallahassee, and a duplicate copy in some other historical place. I can't remember.
But you all have the original.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, that's interesting. It seems like not only are you kind of creating this repository and this collection, but you are also getting to know this network of collectors and artists and thinkers and creators in that pursuit. Well,
I have done that, but not to the extent that Sam and Robbie Vickers did when they put their collection together. I mean, they would tell me, Sam and I became good friends when I lived in Jacksonville, and he would tell me when I was over at his house looking at his collection that anytime somebody in New York, an art gallery, saw a palm tree, they would call Sam, because he collected everything Florida. And he did put together a wonderful collection. Hopefully it's going to be at Harn forever, but we do have a portion of that collection on on display in the governor's house in St. Augustine.
Fantastic.
So yes, he created a huge network of resources, a fraction of what I collected.
Fair enough, fair enough. And in thinking about Florida history and your passion and drive to preserve Florida history in these aspects and in this collection, can you just reflect about why that's important to you and Dolores?
Well, we're both almost Florida natives, and my roots go back to the 1820s, as I mentioned. Florida, it's hard to imagine, but in 1940, Florida's population was less than West Virginia's, South Carolina, Arkansas. And so during my lifetime, I was born in 42, I have seen Florida transform from a very rural, out-of-the-way place to what it is today, which is a dramatic change. Now we're the third most populous state. And so I just, it seems important to me to document and codify what was Florida, because people who come down from the north now just see what it is and don't really appreciate what it was. And what it was, in my opinion, is a lot better than what it is. But it's important to me to provide a window into the past. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you. We look forward to seeing the exhibit that comes about from all of this.
Well, they're going to have about a 2,500 square foot space in the library in the UNF, and they're going to have a lot of maps on display, a lot of interactive stuff. So I'm excited about it.
Fantastic. This feels like a great time to jump over to UF Historic St. Augustine.
All right.
I know that's one of the ways that your interest in history has kind of manifested here in the community. Will you give us a little bit of backstory about UF Historic St. Augustine and how you got involved?
Yes. My first introduction to the now operating organization came when Ed Popple came over from Gainesville at the behest of Bernie Matchin, the president of the university, to see if I would be willing to go on the board as chairman of the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine. And at the time, I was on the board of UF Health in Gainesville. And the health industry is so complicated and so changing that I never felt like that I could understand enough to be a major contributor to the board. And so when Ed offered me this position as chairman, I said, I will take it on one condition, and that is that Bernie let me resign from the board of UF Health, and he did. And so it was a confluence of fortunate events that I got off something that I didn't feel like I was making a major contribution, and got involved in a organization that was very compatible with my interest and really the love of history. So it was an easy decision for me to make to get involved. It was in a very formative stage at that point, so we really didn't have anything going on. And fortunately, we had Ed Popple, who was able to secure funding from the state to allow us to maintain and preserve the historic properties. And then Ed did a number of other things that were instrumental in our success. But it was Ed and Bernie Matchin that got me involved, and I'm glad they did.
And what year was that?
It had to be back in around 2010, 2011, in that frame. because we didn't really get started as an operating entity until around 2012 or 13.
So you really were involved at the foundation, design, visioning phase?
I was involved in the, more in the operating phase than the visioning phase, because by the time I got involved, there was a strategic plan already developed. There was a number of people got involved, like Roy Hunt, Roy Graham, Michael Gannon, Kathy Deegan, that kind of developed the focus and the strategy for what the organization should do. And my role was basically to try to implement, what the vision that they had created.
And will you talk about what you remember, of course, of what the vision was and some of the things that they had in mind?
Well, initially, the charge from the legislature was to maintain and preserve the state-owned historic properties. And I mean, that was the main mission of the organization. But in addition to that, the visionaries said, we needed to do more than maintain the properties. We need to interpret history. We need to create a history lab in St. Augustine to highlight what happened here and educate people to that effect. So it was more than just maintaining the buildings. It was, let's do what we can to increase the awareness of history in St. Augustine, not only to tourists, but to residents as well.
And what were some of the properties? I know it's kind of grown since that initial 8, but what were some of the properties there?
Well, actually, there were more than 8, more than 7 that Bill Proctor mentioned, because the 7 properties he mentioned were the St. Augustine Foundation properties. And there were other state-owned properties, and they donated those to the state. And so there were probably, I'm guessing 28 or 29 historic state-owned properties. And then I was on the board of the Historical Society with Michael Gannon, and they were struggling with maintaining the properties that they owned. And they had 8 or 10 properties that they owned. So with Michael's permission, because he was very instrumental in the Historical Society, we entered into a long-term lease. We, being the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine, leased the Historical Society's properties. And back then, that qualified us for the PO&M money, which is an operating, I can't remember what that is, but it basically provides a certain amount of money per square foot per property for the maintenance and operation of the properties. So because of that, the St. Augustine properties get around $200,000 a year to maintain their properties, and the same is true for the properties that the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine organization maintains. So we have that predictable pool of money coming in to maintain, and in addition to that, we lease the Colonial Quarter and other commercial and residential units downtown. So we have a pretty good cash flow that allows us to not only maintain the properties, but also to do other things as well.
And what was the condition of some of these properties before
Not good.
this?
And the centerpiece, it was Governor's House at the time, the Government House, and it was just in really poor shape. And we were able to get an appropriation from the state to do probably $8 or $10 million of improvements to that facility, and as well as other facilities. But they were the city had the responsibility of trying to maintain them. And the city was losing probably $800,000 a year on the colonial quarter, or the Spanish Quarter it was called back then. So they didn't have the money to maintain it. And that was one of the reasons that Bill Proctor said, let's find another source of funds so that we can properly maintain these important historical properties. So it's now, we're in a very predictable pattern of improvement and maintenance so that all the properties are up to snuff and can withstand, the terrible climate we have here in St. Augustine.
So bring me back to kind of those first days. You've just been recruited as chairman of the board. What was the path before you?
Well, clearly the path was to maintain and preserve the properties. That was priority one. And then after that, the first thing that we did that was meaningful was we Ed Popple, I say Ed because he was the principal negotiator, put the Spanish Quarter up for bid because we knew that we didn't have the expertise to run it. The city was losing money hand over fist. So we, fortunately, were able to attract Pat Croce and his organization, who was very, very active in Key West and has the Pirates Museum here in St. Augustine. He came aboard and agreed to take over the colonial quarter, improve the structures, develop educational programs, and operate a couple of restaurants there. And so that was the first thing that we got that monkey off our back, that he was expert at doing this type of thing and we weren't. And that has grown to the point where we probably get a couple $100,000 a year from the lease that we have with them. They're making money. There are now 3 restaurants along St. George Street that provides them with revenue to maintain and continue their operation. But in the back, behind the restaurants, it's all history. And so that's why Herschel Shepherd said, why don't we give them the opportunity to make money on St. George Street, and maybe the tourists will stumble into some history behind it. And that's happened. And they've created a real strong relationship with the reenactment community in St. Augustine, which has enhanced their presentations, as well as given the reenactment community a lot of notoriety.
That's interesting. That's making me wonder how many people are kind of touched by UF Historic St. Augustine in the community and beyond. What does that network look like?
Well, it's growing. It started out with a colonial quarter, and then right after the colonial quarter, we said, another thing we need to do is create a way to distribute Florida history, St. Augustine's history, to the nation and the world. And we can't expect people to come here, so what can we do to export what happened in St. Augustine? And so we got together with David Colburn, Michael Gannon, Ed Popple, Susan Parker, Kathy Deegan, Michael Francis, and myself, and we started thinking about what we could do, and we popped up with the idea of a documentary. Why don't we create a documentary that shows the colonial history of St. Augustine, and see if we can get it accepted by and distributed by PBS. So we use that core group to kind of identify the important elements of St. Augustine's history, which turned out to be a 4 1-hour documentary episodes on the history of St. Augustine from 1565 to 1821. And I assume you've seen it. And so it was accepted by PBS, it was shown nationally. Now it's being shown internationally. It's dubbed in Spanish for the Spanish country. So anyway, one of the things we did was that. I mean, we involved a lot of people simply because they bought the disc or they streamed it or whatever, and we're making probably $50,000 a year on that. Another thing that we did that just recently has happened over the last 3 years is the History Festival. As you probably know, being a native of St. Augustine, there's a festival for everything except history. I mean, there's beer festivals, there's seafood festivals, there's wine festivals, there's all sorts of festivals, but no history festival. So we said, look, let's see if we can emphasize the importance of St. Augustine in a festival about history. And so we got together with a number of historical venues and asked them if they thought that was a good idea, and they really loved it. So we started out small the first year because we didn't know whether it was going to be accepted. And we had probably 20 historic venues that participated. And the thing that was gratifying to me was that they not only were they enthusiastic about the idea of a history festival, but they started working together as a history community. And in the past, they would do their own thing, their own marketing, their own programming, they were operating in silos, and there was no integration or interface or synergy between historical venues. This gave them the opportunity to work together, and they did. I mean, they got excited about, all of the people that were involved, and that's been going on now for 3 years, and it's grown steadily over the last 3 years and continues to grow. Matter of fact, next year we're going to include Marineland, and while people are down here, they're going to see the Matanzas Fort. So it's growing. It started out as St. Augustine, and now it goes all the way from Fort Mose to Marineland.
And who are you finding is attracted to St. Augustine, this kind of market for St. Augustine's history?
Interestingly enough, we find that the local population is more interested in this than the tourist, and the reason is that St. Augustine is one of the fastest growing, or St. Johns County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country, certainly in Florida, and so a lot of people that live here now are totally unfamiliar with what happened here before. So when they have an opportunity to come to town and participate in a history festival, it gives them a better idea of where they moved. Now we still get tourists, but we knew, or we had hoped, that we would attract a lot of local or regional interest in the history festival, and we have.
That's really interesting. I am thinking about interpretation of historical sites. I'm thinking about the History Festival, but also in the charge to preserve and maintain and interpret historic St. Augustine's properties. And we talked before we started recording with Dr. Proctor about just how fragmented St. Augustine's history is because of the longevity here. Can you talk a little bit about how you all as an organization went about what felt appropriate for interpretation and preservation standards, those kinds of things?
Well, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we knew that most of the historic venues and properties had their own programs and their own objectives, and so we wanted to just get them working together to try to create a critical mass of history. So we didn't say we want to do this, interpret this so much as opposed to this. We said to the historical venues, you interpret your properties the way you think they ought to be interpreted. Initially we said, well, let's have a theme every year, like military or architecture or pirates or whatever. And we said, no, that's not a good idea because not everybody is involved in a single theme. Let them interpret whatever they want to interpret, but let's work together to make sure that people are exposed to things that they may not have been exposed to before. And the marketing, you know, when the historic venues operated as a silo, they didn't have the marketing budget to really bring people in. It was just like you stumble into the lighthouse or you stumble into the oldest house or whatever. With our marketing, we are able to reach out to a broader audience and bring people in, and they pick whatever they want to see.
That makes sense. And how did you all identify the priorities for implementing the strategic plan or moving forward with certain projects or others?
Well, again, the priority number one is maintain and preserve the properties. I mean, that's job one. And then we selected certain initiatives that we felt would contribute to the mission of the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine, like the Colonial Quarter, like the documentary, like the History Festival, like the library that is in Governor's House, the Preservation Institute of St. Augustine, the archaeological lab that's partnered with Flagler. So we identified what we thought was relevant to St. Augustine and tried to implement programs that brought that relevance to life. And we've done a number of things that I wouldn't call it prioritization. I would call it just capitalizing on the opportunity that was here.
That makes sense. You have a unique vantage as a longtime resident of Northeast Florida and St. Augustine, as well as connections to UF. Can you talk about the dynamic between UF and St. Augustine and what it was like for the local community to have UF kind of come in as a major managing entity?
Well, I wasn't involved at the time because we hadn't established the board and I hadn't become chairman. But when the idea of the University of Florida assuming responsibility for the state-owned properties came up, it was not greeted with open arms by some of the city commissioners. They were concerned that they were going to lose control over the Spanish Quarter. They were concerned they were going to be overshadowed by the 800-pound gorilla coming from Gainesville. So there was some reluctance to see UF come to St. Augustine, even though it made perfect sense from a financial point of view. I'll have to say that Ed Popple worked very hard to change that perception and turn that reluctance around to a very positive position. He moved forward with our mission. He established a very good working relationship with John Reagan, the city manager. He established a monthly meeting with John and his senior staff to communicate what we're doing, to find out what the city was doing, to see if there's any synergy. So it was a challenge to start with, but Ed, in his very, very comfortable, reassuring way, brought the city around to a point where the mayor at the time was not really happy about it. This was in the middle of the 450th celebration, and he didn't want to lose control of that. We said, no, we don't have anything to do with that. That's yours. But it turned out that the mayor became one of our biggest fans, and it was solely due to the hard work and personality of Ed Popple.
Where do you think that reluctance came from? Why was there maybe some hesitation about UF? Like, where did those feelings come from?
I think it was a control issue. I think it was a concern about UF overshadowing Flagler in an academic way. I just think that it was more of a concern or fear of the unknown than it was a specific issue. But they had operated like they had operated for years, and anytime you throw in a big change, it's going to create nervousness, and that's what it was more. Yeah, I would say probably it wasn't so much a fear as it was just a concern about what might happen.
And do you have a sense of how the relationship has panned out positively for the city of St. Augustine?
One of the examples I can point to is the monument issue that came up. We told John and the city that we wanted to be good partners in the monument issue. The city had a monument that some groups wanted to remove. We had the Loring Monument on our property that they also wanted to remove. Very controversial issue. We said to the city, whatever you do, we'll do. And so when the city first came out with the notion of interpreting their monument, we developed a plan to put a monument next to the Loring Monument that showed the black Confederate soldiers by name, so that there was a counterbalance to not the Confederate, the St. Augustine residents that fought for the Union. So then the city changed its mind and said, we're going to remove our monument. So again, Ed Popple established communication with the Loring family. And the Loring family said, we don't like the controversy. We would like for the monument to be removed and our relatives' remains be reinterred somewhere appropriate. And so we were able to go to the university at that time and convince them that not only should the monument be removed because of the family, but we had a place to put it, Randy Ringhaver's place out on 13, and we had a burial place at the Craig Cemetery on Old Moultrie Road, and we also got the University of Florida to pay for it. So all of this cemented the mutual benefit between St. Augustine and University of Florida. Plus, we had, as you know, we've got maps downtown that show where you are and where the various historical shots. Those are all at the behest of the University of Florida. The History Festival has created an economic benefit to the city. So I mean, there's a number of different. I mean, and the documentary has also created a visibility that we didn't have before. So, I mean, just there are a number of different elements that we think have benefited the city, and I think they would share that view.
During the kind of the monument era, we'll say, it was a super hot-tempered time for St. Augustine. And I'm just wondering about what it was like for you and your colleagues with UF Historic St. Augustine, and the city for that matter, to be kind of public figureheads in this debate. Like, I'm just wondering what that was like for you all, and if you fielded any complaints, or just what that experience was like for you all.
Well, the University of Florida board meeting is an open meeting, so the public is invited. So there were occasions when we were discussing the monument and how we were going to handle it, that we had people from both sides of the issue come to make their opinions known to our board. And some of them were pretty ugly and pretty emotional, and we didn't like the public exposure to the board, but it was necessary and legal. The thing that I think quieted everything down was when the family said, "We want this done," and it just fell into place after that. But there were no threats. There were no difficult times, other than going through the opinions of a number of people who were not very polite in their opinion as they presented it. But we got through it.
That's right, here you are. Do you have any questions, Ronan?
Yeah, maybe sure.
Okay, let me just transfer this over real quick.
So you've mentioned a few of the people that you worked with through the UFHSA, but I'm curious about some other of those people, especially Dr. William Proctor, who we were just speaking to earlier. So when this partnership began, what was that relationship like with him?
As you know from your discussion this morning, Bill is the most humble, cooperative, friendly person in the world. Plus, he is a very, very influential person in not only St. Augustine, but in the state. Our relationship was always good because we respected his opinion. He wasn't dogmatic in any way at all, but he was a very helpful board member as controversial issues came up, or when we needed support for some of the initiatives we took, like the documentary and the Colonial Quarter and that type of thing. But his perspective has always been valued by not only me but other members of the board. But I can't give Bill enough credit for what he's done, not only for St. Augustine and the many roles that he played here, but for the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine. I mean, he's really an icon in this community.
Yeah. So I would ask a similar question about Michael Gannon, someone coming from UF who is also deeply involved in this.
Michael Gannon is one of my favorite people in the world, and just because he is enthusiastic about history. I mean, he is, and not only enthusiastic, he has got a wealth of knowledge about what happened in Florida, what happened in St. Augustine, and he shared that knowledge. He wrote many books that I've read every one of them. He was very instrumental in how we told the story in the documentary. He was always ready to do whatever he needed to do to forward the objectives of the organization. And as you may know, because of his valuable contributions, we have named the governor's office in Michael's honor. So it's Michael Gannon Room in the governor's office in the governor's house.
Yeah, that's incredible. So that I would also ask, how you mentioned the concerns over kind of stepping on the toes of like Flagler College by bringing in UF. What was done to like keep Flagler College involved somehow in this historical preservation?
Well, first of all, we put Bill Proctor on the board, and he was the past president, so we got him involved early on. We also got Tracy Upchurch, who was a professor at Flagler, involved. And Tracy left our board to become mayor of Florida, of St. Augustine, when Nancy Shaver had the physical problem, and then when he went off when he served his term as mayor, we reinstated him on the board. He's retired now from Flagler, but he's going to be the next chairman of the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine.
Excellent.
And so we have tried. Joe Joyner, who was president of Flagler, was on our board for a short time until he resigned, and because he resigned, he asked to be removed from the board. So we've tried to maintain a very close working relationship to the senior people at Flagler, plus a working relationship through the archaeological lab and the PISA lab. So, and Kathy Deegan is on our board, and she's also on the board of Flagler College. So those connections are very valuable in maintaining the good working relationship we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So also kind of similar to that, the Lincolnville and the kind of Lincolnville historical preservation that happens there is a good partnership with the oral history program, and
right.
I've loved seeing their museum and everything. So I'm curious how that relationship has played out with that like very strong community. So.
We have offered. I mean, they participate in the history festival, so that's one thing. We have offered to give them snippets from the documentary that relate to Fort Mose or Lincolnville or whatever, and they've accepted that, and they have that rolling in their museum. The Phillips are very focused on what they want, and I don't disagree with what they want. I'm just saying that they want to control it as well. Yeah. So it's not been easy to integrate anything that we can do to be helpful with them, simply because they have a vision that they want to pursue, and that vision is appropriate for us. We just want to help in any way we can, but they haven't called on us.
Yeah, I mean, all of these questions over public history and historical preservation are very touchy and sensitive frequently for people, and kind of bring out these feelings. But in terms of like recent developments in historic preservation and public history in St. Augustine, for me, it really is Fort Mose that kind of stands out in that as, and it's sort of an interesting thing in a conversation about historic preservation, because there's not really something there to preserve, but it's almost all interpretation. So
there will be something there.
Okay.
Because they've got funding to rebuild the fort.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's news to me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they had a capital campaign to reconstruct the fort there. And I'm happy to say that our family foundation made a contribution to that. Wow. So, and our family foundation also made a contribution to the school they're rebuilding in Lincolnville. So we've not only at the University of Florida Historic St. Augustine, but we've tried to support things through our family foundation that are consistent with the mission of the DSO.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, those are my questions.
Deborah, do you have any questions? I do want to ask you a few questions about your leadership style at the suggestion of Ed. Can you talk about your leadership style and also what it looks like for you to put together a good, functioning, successful board?
Well, I guess my leadership style was developed when I was with Barnett. because I went from a market analyst to a bank president to an executive vice president so I saw my leadership style evolve, and I guess my first experience of being a bank president in Gainesville was to recognize that the employee of the bank was the critical piece of the formula. Because if you take care of your employees, they take care of the customer, and the customer will take care of the shareholder. So it's a domino effect of just saying, if you make your people happy to be at work, they're going to make the customers feel welcome, and the customers are going to use more of your services, and the shareholders are going to benefit. So that was kind of the foundation stone of my management style. When I became president of Gainesville, I had never made a loan, so I had a lot to learn. And about 4 years later, they gave me responsibility for 18 banks from Key West to Pensacola. And some of these bank presidents had been bank presidents longer than I had been an adult. So I learned to listen more than I talked, because these guys knew what they were doing, and they were doing a good job. I learned that they expected me to give them objectives, quantitative objectives as well as quantitative, about their performance. Then they expected me, and I expected myself, to measure them against that performance. And then if they did well, reward them. If they didn't do well, try to correct the problem. So it evolved from a focus on the customer to making sure that people understood what I wanted, and in a very definitive way, and that they were going to be held accountable, and we would go from there, good or bad. So that's kind of the way my management style evolved at the bank. When I became chairman of the board, it was like herding cats, because I had no authority. I just except for making a rational case for whatever we wanted to do, and that evolved in making sure that everybody on the board had an opportunity to express their view about whatever we were considering, and eventually, in the patience that I have demonstrated all my life, which is not a joke, which is a joke, that during the discussion period, we all seemed to coalesce into a consensus, and it wasn't necessarily a consensus that I tried to direct. It was just a consensus that made sense, and so we just we herded cats for about 10 years, and it worked out good because we all had similar objectives and similar priorities.
And can you talk a little bit, just briefly, about who some of the board members have been over the years? You've mentioned a few people, but...
Yeah, the original board was appointed by the University of Florida, so we were not involved in the initial board. But in the bylaws, it requires us to have a historian. It requires us to have an archaeologist, and it also requires us to have an architect. So those three positions are given, and then the board was appointed by the president of the University of Florida. Some of the board members never came. So after a while, we after giving them a chance to mend their ways, if they didn't, we replaced them. Some of them had health issues or whatever, and got off the board that way. But in the ones that we had openings, we were able to replace with people that we thought would be contributory and valuable to the organization. So going back, Kathy Deegan has just been an outstanding board member. She's rotating off now, and she's Michael Gannon was outstanding. Unfortunately, he passed away. David Colburn was outstanding, and unfortunately, he passed away. Herschel Shepard, the architect, is a wise person. I mean, he's the one that championed historic preservation. But he also championed the notion of let the colonial quarter make money, because they need to make money to continue their operation. But then let them focus on history off St. George Street. So he really is the one that made that a viable entity. Rick Gonzalez, another architect, has been outstanding. Michael Francis, who is a wonderful friend of mine and the best storyteller I've ever heard, has been incredibly helpful. Bill Robinson came from the university. He was a finance man at UF Health, and his financial expertise has been very helpful to us. Tracy Upchurch, I've mentioned before. He's going to be the new chairman. Doug Wiles, another St. Augustinian that has been very, very contributory. Buff Gordon, unfortunately she had to resign because of her husband's health problem, but she's been great. Roy Hunt is vice chairman, and Roy has just been outstanding. I mean, he's chaired our educational committee, and he's an icon in Florida history himself. So we've just had a wonderful, wonderful board. It's just John Reagan is now on the board. Doug Jones from the university is on our board now. Jim Cusick is coming on. We've put together a board that I am sure is going to take us to the next level, even though I'm not going to be involved.
And what was your decision to step back?
I'm termed out.
Oh, I see. I see. Would you stay on if you could?
No. I think 12 years is about as much as I've had as much fun as I can stand. But it's time to turn. I mean, any organization needs new blood, and I am delighted with the board that we have. I'm delighted with the experience I've had, but it's time to move on.
And so you mentioned that the new board is well positioned to take it into the next level. What do you see the next level as?
We've got enough creative people there that they can imagine things that I can't. But I do know that I'd like to see them flesh out the PISA, flesh out the historical festival, maintain the properties as they've been maintained. I'm sure they will be, because Linda Dixon has been involved in the organization since day one, and she knows everything that's happened. So I just I'm comfortable and expect that this group will identify other opportunities that I may overlook.
Fair enough. Very diplomatic. We've been talking for about an hour, and I want to make sure to be respectful of the lunch hour. I think we've gone through the majority of our questions. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, or maybe something that I or we didn't think to ask you about that feels important to mention?
The only thing that that I've touched on, but I just want to emphasize the support that we've gotten from Ed and Linda and Billy Triai. They have made my job a lot easier. They have created a system of management that makes sure that we achieve our mission and our goals and our objectives. They're dedicated to the organization, and I'm sure that Billy and Linda will continue, but Ed's loss is going to be significant. I mean, he's a special guy, and how he negotiated the documentary film contract, how he maneuvered through the bureaucracy at the university, none of that could have happened without Ed's background and knowledge. So I just want to express my deep appreciation to those three for making my job as easy as it has been.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to having them hear you say that. So thank you for that. And thanks again for having us here in your home and for sitting with us for this hour. This has been
my pleasure.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.